So you've decided to join the dark side. You have to go and host your app on the cloud. What are you going to do? You got to find your cloud platform first and foremost. But before we get into that, let me just tell you, you got to hang around to the end of the video because I'm going to show you a secret to still maintain your independence, still be on the light side, but be in the cloud. Hang on. So you're joining the cloud. Why are you joining the cloud? First and foremost, your organization probably is saying you have to deploy on the cloud. We don't want your little self-hosted solution. And that's really sad for you. I feel for you. As someone who loves self-hosting everything, I understand this more than you might think. And the other reason is because your organization may not be big enough to maintain the hardware, or may not have the budgeting restrictions for hardware like CapEx, OpEx, those sorts of things. If it's an operational expense, sometimes businesses will approve it. If it's a capital expense, which is where it's just like a big lump sum payment, businesses may not go for it. So I can see why you may be in this situation, but let me explain. You do not need to panic. The first thing you need to do is go and choose your platform. So you've got three options for you, three real options. Let's be real. You've got AWS, GCP, or Azure. Now, I think that Azure is probably the weakest of those platforms. GCP has got a lot of ease of use going for it. I've found that deploying Docker containers with GCP is so much more of a smoother process than deploying through Azure. AWS has got a lot of flexibility. I think also AWS has got quite low costs in comparison to the other platforms. And then, of course, you've got Azure, which is what, if you're ever deploying for enterprise, most of the time you'll be deploying to Azure just because it's what Microsoft's wheelhouse has always been, is enterprise. So given that you choose one of them, you've got to start looking at deploying with templates. You must use it because it saves you a ton of hassle. It makes your cloud deployment so much more scalable. For anyone who knows me, I love Pocketbase, and deploying with Pocketbase with templates has just been such a huge benefit. If you're deploying with Azure, you've got to check out Bicep. I think that it's a really good way of writing infrastructure as code and saving me a lot of hassle, which I would have otherwise had if I had to use their portal. But if you want to make your infrastructure even more flexible, you can check out Terraform, which allows you to deploy to GCP, AWS, and Azure. And what you want to do is write out all of the infrastructure that you're going to be making and get it into those templates. Once you've done that, you can start doing some sort of scripting stuff in order to build your deployment templates and deploy everything just in one massive hit. And I'd recommend that you do that only after you first look at how your team is going to be developing locally. And if you don't have a team, if it's just you solo, I mean, maybe you can save yourself some time by looking at your local development environment firstly before you look at cloud deployments. Because if you get your local development wrong, the impact is going to be exponential for your development. So for instance, a 5-minute deploy to a cloud in order to see the changes that you make in your own app's code may not seem like a lot to begin with. But the problem is that over a year, that equates to days or even weeks of time, which you're just waiting around for code to build. So I think it's super important to make sure that your local environment's working well, especially across the deployments where I've done it. And we've had lots of teams working on it. Most of the time, to get a team up to speed, the team doesn't want to learn how to deploy to cloud. They want to learn how to get stuff working locally on their machine, and they want to play around on their machine before, and then just have the cloud stuff handled by someone else. Because oftentimes, if they're having trouble deploying to cloud, they have to learn a whole new set of skills in order to troubleshoot and fix the issue. So get your local development environment right first. Normally what that involves is setting up a way of deploying a database locally, or if you have to run up your Docker images, setting up a compose file, which people can run up locally, or even something to do with Kubernetes in order to spin it up locally. I think this is important to get right first and foremost. Obviously, it differs depending on the size of the application. If you've got lots of containers that you have to spin up, then you won't always have the luxury, but get it as much right as you can on the local script side before you look at moving any further. Once you've hit that point, then you want to start looking at scripting for your CI/CD environments. This is where you would set up GitHub Actions if you're using GitHub, or where you would look at using Azure DevOps CI/CD pipelines, or the Azure, I think they're called Azure DevOps pipelines. And that's basically GitHub Actions, but in a different syntax. And you're able to get your scripts deploying automatically whenever anyone pushes to the code base. So really important to look at this step, because I think it's going to be the biggest impact for your team if you're setting up proper workflow for Git. And then the next thing to consider is, how is your logging set up? How are your costs set up? How's your insights set up? It's really hard to see how much your app's going to cost on the cloud without using some sort of calculator. All of the big platforms have some sort of cost calculator that you can easily calculate things. And if you've got these containers with these fixed IPs, with these fixed storage, you're pretty easily able to see what the cost is going to be with a calculator. So I'd recommend using that. I think that with cloud deployments, unlike local deployments, or even just deploying to a VPS, as we often do with something like a self-hosted platform, Coolify, we have to get logging right out of the gate, because it's one of those things which, when you're looking at deploying into the cloud with lots of cloud containers and things like that, or even with just lots of VMs, you need to aggregate a lot of those logs in some place. You shouldn't have to log on to each single machine in order to gauge what machine is doing what. And aggregation you get out of the box in a lot of these platforms. So for Azure, you get logging with application insights, and it's really rock solid, and you get it out of the box. AWS has similar, same with GCP. So definitely deploy your logging first. Now I want to talk to you guys about the secret sauce. And I think this is a way that I've managed to keep my code agnostic when it comes to deploying on cloud platforms, and that is Kubernetes. Now, I heard this on a Fireship video. If you guys haven't seen Fireship, he's a YouTuber, and he said, if you deploy Kubernetes to solve a problem, now you have two problems. It put me off Kubernetes for the longest time, but this is why I think that Kubernetes is probably the best way of deploying into the cloud, and why I think you should learn it. Kubernetes allows you to use this infrastructure as code and make deployment templates for a Kubernetes cluster, which can be deployed to all of these different cloud platforms, which means that you have full power over your own cluster. You can assign persistent storage, which is something you can't do, for instance, in Azure Container Apps. You can't assign persistent storage to containers. You can only assign file system or Azure's SMB shares, which they don't play well with Pocket-based. Azure, the only way to deploy Pocket-based into Azure is with Kubernetes. And I think that Kubernetes is great because you can move it from one platform to another very, very easily. And you also get a bunch of tooling as part of Kubernetes in order to manage your containers. So you get the ability to make sure that your containers are communicating in their own little network and not with the outside world. So if you've got services which are relying on each other, you don't have to route those services through the internet, which is potentially insecure and inefficient. You're able to manage all of the inter-networking of these containers very, very simply. If you've done this in Docker and done it manually, you realize how hard it is. But the thing is if you learn this, it's going to save you a lot of time. Like you're able to do things like copy into containers without having to set up SSH tunnels. You're able to do things like shared secrets and shared environments across your whole cluster. You're able to have a continuity and a constant uptime in your app. So that's the secret sauce. Guys, if you're deploying into cloud, I feel for you. I like doing VPS. I like doing things the simplest way. But one thing which I was speaking with one of the co-founders of Grafana, which if you haven't heard of it, is a tool for being able to manage your logs for Kubernetes clusters and Docker and all the rest of it. And one of the things he was saying is, he said he loves simplicity as well. VPS is great for doing simple app deployments. The issue comes in is when you're working across multiple teams, like when you've got 50 people working across an app, that's when you need to start looking at deploying into the cloud with sort of container apps and looking at this micro architecture, because that is really what's going to be able to make things modular and able to be worked on by separate teams. So if that's not you, if you're not at that point yet, disregard all of this stuff. You don't need to learn it. But if that is, then my friend, this is going to help you go and get your stuff deployed as quickly as possible. Now, I hope this one helps, guys. If you are interested all in cloud deployments, if you're interested in programming, AI, getting better as a developer, I recommend that you check out my newsletter. My newsletter is where I talk about all of the things that we're doing and all of the news for the week, any tools that we're finding is super, super useful and making us more efficient. And yeah, I recommend checking that out. If you want to build apps fast, I recommend you check out Fast Pocket. Is the Pocket-based builder for building apps with a Next.js backend and a beautiful React front end. It has helped me build up many an app very, very quickly, and I recommend you check it out. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.